Are you busy today, Alex, by the way?
Normal work stuff.
Huh?
Normal work stuff.
Oh, no more work stuff.
Normal work. No more normal work stuff. So I'm still like
No more
working and
work
doing
stuff.
stuff, but it's fine. Mhm.
Okay, nice. So what do you usually do at your school? Management.
So I originally started as like a student advisor. So basically advising like programs and getting people to arrive to, back then it was only in China, so only Beijing. And then now I'm doing pretty much everything around it. So operations, like managing people, hiring new people, and just make sure that everything runs smoothly.
Yeah, good. Let me see if we are going live right now.
Mhm.
Yes, we are going live. Nice. Okay, when you're ready, we can get started.
So,
Yeah, okay. Thank you for your time, by the way.
um,
Okay, let's get started. Welcome to another episode of the Caddy Show. Most of us, we all believe speaking multiple foreign languages and communicate with a local style is pretty cool, especially when you travel to another country, study there, work there, and even start up a business there. It will save you tremendous money for hiring an interpreter. I'm so honored today for having a polyglot with me today. Let's find out what's his secret for learning a second language or even multiple languages. Alexander Kwasnov is originally born in Russia, but grew up most of his life in Israel. He is a language learning enthusiast, having a combined experience of 20 years of learning languages, originally starting from Japanese. He has been adding on and learning language since then, and currently is conversational in 9 languages. Aside from mainstream languages such as Chinese, German, Spanish, and others, Alex also likes to delve into dialects such as Shanghainese, Hokkien, and Cantonese. Alex is the vice CEO of LTL Language School, an immersion-based school based in various cities in Asia, and is aimed at providing a unique language learning experience to its students, complementing group and private classes with immersive homestay accommodations and lots of language exposure. Alex currently lives in Guiyang, Guizhou province in China with his wife and son. So, Alice, I'm just curious, why are you so interested in learning so many languages?
yeah. So thanks for that. So I originally started like learning languages when I was like 16 or 17 back in high school. Back then, friends of mine introduced me to the Japanese language. So they introduced me to anime, manga, stuff like that, and I really liked that. And they were like speaking like they knew some words from the anime that they were watching. I was like, oh, dude, that's kind of cool. And I was like my essential motivation was always like, if you hear the language often enough, you kind of also want to try and start speaking it because you think like, oh, if I could speak it, that would be awesome. So an example of that, for example, is one of the esoteric language that I'm learning is Mongolian. And the
Oh,
reason I'm learning it is because I like metal music, and one band that I like is a Chinese Mongolian band that like sings in Chinese and in Mongolian. So I'm like, if I could speak Mongolian, that would be totally awesome. So that's kind of my motivation around learning languages.
wow, nice. So, let's say if you don't speak Chinese, right, and you have to go
Mhm.
to China 35 days, so what would you do from day 1 to day 35 to survive in China and communicate with locals there if you cannot use any technologies?
Sure. So this actually really interesting that you mentioned not the use of technology because as like in LTL, we have a lot of students who are exactly this kind of situation. They arrived for the first time, and because in China, there's no Google and stuff like that, so a lot of them are worried specifically about this kind of situation. What happens when I arrive? No one speaks English and stuff like that. So we build like support systems around that specific to get them like up and going through the first few weeks. So one thing that I would start, like if I was like, for example, a complete beginner arriving to China, was learning food items. So how to order food, how to like give names of the foods. And not only so that I can order this stuff, but also because this becomes a kind of a connection to people. So that way you more easily get connected with locals, because they would ask you, oh, like, what do you like about China and stuff like that. And you say like, oh, I like Dongbao Jiming and stuff like that. And they're like, oh, awesome, you know all these words. And then through that, you kind of get this connection with people that is much harder to get otherwise. Like people are interested if you mention like some kind of or more obscure words and stuff like that. They're like, oh, what do you know more? And they get more excited. So you get more excited and you get more motivated because of it. So stuff like food items, and obviously the regular stuff like how to count money, how to say different words like for where to get told. Addresses are super important, specifically for taxi and stuff like that. And any kind of content that's just interesting for people and for you. I would say that would be the kind of big thing if you're there for, if you have only, let's say, a month. So you're there just to essentially to get to know people.
Yeah. So what's your personal study plan for those, 35 study plan for those people who want to speak daily Chinese in just 35 days? They only have 35 days.
Part of the stuff that you do is you study by yourself with like Anki and flashcards stuff like that. And a big part of it, if you're already in the country, is you try those stuff out on other people. Where you start with just even like as an excuse, just asking people on the street, like, oh, where's the toilet? How to get to this and this. I used to do that a lot when I was like, not just in China, when I was in Japan, I was basically kind of bothering people on the street, like basically asking them like just general question. And then when they see that you speak the language, they get excited. So you have a chance to practice with them. So I would use that as a kind of a crutch, like those kind of questions about where is the toilet or how to get to this and this, specifically so that they get interested, like, oh, you speak a bit of Chinese and blah, blah, and you start a conversation with that. So you use that like through the month to basically gather more and more vocabulary and to get like specific that motivation of continuing long term, because that's like how the language works, right? You don't just study for 1 month and then you're done. You need to basically continue with motivation so that you can continue for years to come.
Yes. So one day before they come to China, you would suggest they learn the food items first, right? And just pick up some, daily conversation language. Yeah, in China. So when they come to China, they can use it. Like, what's the toilet? Where is the toilet? Right? Something like this. How to go somewhere, right?
And most of our study materials, they basically start like that. So it's always topical. You don't start with, learning grammar or learning like making drills or character stuff. Like you learn from what's the stuff that's the most useful that you can immediately use.
Yes, the most useful stuff first. Yeah, and then when they come to China, they go to the street, right? Ask the pedestrians there, and then they gradually pick up the Chinese language.
Or you can, for example, like stuff that's related to it, let's say, because the aim is there is to get motivation and to get to know people, right? So you start with, for example, let's say you ask like, oh, like you go to like a shop and you ask like someone nearby, let's say in a bubble tea shop, like, oh, what do you recommend? And then they will get like talking with you about this and that, and then you make the connection and you try new stuff on the way.
Yeah. Good idea. Yes. So would you recommend a person to learn a new language all by themselves?
Definitely. I mean, there is no kind of no loss from it. You don't lose anything by starting something new. And obviously, like, people, so, with like people are afraid when they have kids, and I have kids. So like people tell me that, oh, like don't speak to him in multiple languages because otherwise you will get confused, stuff like that. That's actually completely untrue. So our brains are amazing machines that can process loads of information. So if you start a language, like before you go to that country, it's already a huge step in itself, and it already gives you, even if you don't remember everything, and that's completely all right. Repetition is more important than than sitting there and learning vocabulary stuff like that. Just basically repeating, exposing yourself to that, and getting that interest there is more important than the vocabulary or the stuff like the grammar that you learn. So you starting from that, so that when you go to the country, you benefit much more from it. Is much more important.
Yeah, yeah. What about the two languages you are learning are very similar? For example, French and English. Some words they are quite similar, but the pronunciation is different. Don't you think it will get, kind of messed up when it comes to pronunciation? Because I experienced that.
Yeah, yeah, I have that issue more with Spanish and Italian, even though Italian technically is more closer to French, but in terms of like it sounds kind of similar. So sometimes when I speak, let's say in Italian, some words in Spanish pop up to me first. So those are kind of issues because both of those language to me are not none of them is the B1, B2, or C1 level. So I get those kind of
Yes.
confused sometimes. But I would say that's more of a good thing in some sense because when people correct you, they get like, you get closer to them because of it. So like, oh yeah, like I made this mistake because whatever. They're like, yeah, I know exactly what you mean. And so it helps connect people more through those mistakes than if you just like spoke perfect, like Italian, let's say, from the start. So it's completely fine. You're allowed to make those mistakes. No one will, you know, no one will be hurt from that, and people might on the opposite will actually feel a closeness to you than if you like start immediately with perfect language skills from the start.
Yeah, yeah, yes, yes. So what about why not following a teacher, right? A teacher could, it's a shortcut for people. You don't need to search for a lot of materials online and it's not systematic, right? So do you recommend to follow a teacher to pick up a language faster?
Definitely. I mean, so when you start learning a language, especially when you're so I've been learning a lot of languages now, so like I have to compartmentalize time a bit more. But with people who are starting a first language for the first time, they have a lot of this kind of time that they can focus on just that one language, and then they essentially, ideally, they take a bunch of different stuff together and then mix them together and create a kind of a salad, and then they slowly put it into order. A teacher is a great way to basically put that thing into order, and especially practicing something that's much harder, which is speaking. Because you can, for example, you can read, like practice reading or practice listening by yourself because you have those, if you have those materials, but you can't practice speaking just by speaking to yourself. It's also possible, but it's not really a perfect way to do it. But with a teacher, you can practice with them and they help you basically sort things out. So again, the example that I had with the Mongolian, for example, is that when I was living in Shanghai, I essentially hired a girl who was a university student in one of the universities there to basically. So the first lesson that we had, I told her, I will be speaking towards you, and you don't say anything. Just help me fix my grammar and remind me of vocabulary that I don't remember. So I basically spoke at her, so to say. And then, like, the more I did it, so essentially I told her stories from my life for the past week and stuff like that, once one week for 3 hours each time. At the start, it was really hard because I was stumbling a lot. I was remembering words. It was super tiring. But then slowly but surely, the more I did those classes, the more stories I could enter in every chunk of those 3 hours, and the more she started answering back and asking me questions and stuff like that, specifically so that there was already a discourse. So at that point, I already could speak kind of Mongolian quite well. Now a lot that I forgot, but it was a kind of a essentially practice in this kind of thing of why a teacher is perfect. A teacher is perfect specifically for that kind of practice of speaking that you cannot get anywhere else.
Yeah, yes, that's right. And especially for the Chinese language, we have four tones. And sometimes the pinyin is for the pronunciation system, the pinyin is the same, but the tones are different. But actually, it means totally different things.
Yeah, yeah,
Right?
yeah.
Especially for the Chinese language. That's why I need a teacher to guide you, to correct you, so okay, you made a mistake, and next time you can
Right.
avoid. Yeah. So how do you learn Chinese? Is that by yourself or do you follow a teacher in the beginning?
So when originally I started, well, back in those days, there was that series Pimsleur for learning language stuff like that. I used that for a bunch of languages, and I started that for Chinese. And back then there was a podcast called Chinese Pod, which I used a lot. I basically
Yeah.
like got all like I was subscribed for a long time. I took all their classes, and also a mix of also had classes in university, 6 hours per week, and then later, of course, studied for a semester in Beijing. So as I said, it's a lot of stuff that I took together and put for myself, and then just made a salad and later made the order. One thing that helped me a lot is specifically for Chinese, I was really interested in it. I really liked it. So I did stuff like originally, even before I started like officially studying, I was downloading these kind of like KTV like songs, so like video, like music videos with KTV versions. So that means that the characters are running while they're singing. So it runs over like 我喜欢 or stuff like that. And I'm like, okay, that's, I don't know what it means, but like, but I know that that's the sound of that character. So stuff like that. I learned loads of songs through that, and also like used to basically find these kind of like TV dramas like Tianlong Babu, or like Chinese Paladin, what's called 仙剑奇侠传, which was like really kind of with so it was with English subtitles, but it was good enough. So it was already a point of motivation. I was like watching it just because I enjoyed it. And then on the way, it helped me with basically some stuff got stuck in my brain. So that helped a lot with later with speaking.
Yes, yes. So through your Chinese learning journey, what kind of mistakes have you made?
So one that I kind of tell a lot of the students, because a lot of students of ours are always afraid of making mistakes and stuff like that. So one story that I also tell you is like one of my first days of arrival to China, to Beijing. I had like it was like first day and I had the jet lag, so I woke up early and just decided to walk around our hotel. Back then we were a group of Hanyu Qiao, a Chinese bridge, which was a competition for Chinese. So I was walking around the street there, and I saw like an open shop, like it was 5 in the morning, and a shop open for xiaolongbao, those Chinese small dumpling, right? And so I was like, oh, I've heard about this thing, the dumplings, the Chinese dumplings. And I saw that like my only knowledge of dumplings back then was like from Dynasty Warriors, the video game. So they're like big baozi thing. I was like, okay, I'll go and taste one. So I went there and I asked them, like, so I told him I want to try it. How much is it? And he asked me how many longs do I want? 你要几笼? And I was like, I learned that in Chinese, there's measure words. So I guess okay, long is a measure word for a dumpling. So I'm like, okay, I'm not too hungry. I just woke up, so maybe I want san long. And yeah, so eventually, so the problem is that apparently long, the measure word is for a cage, which includes 10 dumplings. So essentially, I got like 30 dumplings, instead of like the 3 that I thought I'd get. So I was like, okay, well, I can't like say no now. So I went around like to my friends. I basically was just like dealing like dumplings because I didn't know what to do with all of them after I ate my fill. That was my first kind of like it kind of embarrassing, but kind of a fun mistake that I tell to a lot of students nowadays.
Yeah. Yes, very interesting. Have you ever experienced any like predicaments because you mispronounced some Chinese words before? I know I have when I was studying English.
Okay. Yeah, no, so there's all of those kind of things where like 请问 and 请问 and stuff like that. So I've heard about this. I never had anything specific that actually made went bad because of it, but a lot of people just didn't understand in some cases if you don't give context to it. Thankfully, with tones, as far as my understanding goes, a lot of it is more based on the stress rather than tone itself. And as long as the stress is there and they know the context, it's fine. So people don't need to be too worried about it, especially just if they're afraid to start speaking because of the tones. It takes time to get them. It takes a lot of time, basically. So when you start learning, at the start, it's hard to repeat them, hard to make the tones. Then you learn how to also recognize the tones. That's a different issue. But eventually, like you learn, especially with Chinese and the tone language, you learn the words best just by remembering the sound rather than what a big mistake that a lot of people do is that they remember how it's written in pinyin and then like the squiggly mark for the second or third tone or whatever. And that's a mistake because then you remember the pinyin, you don't remember what is the mark. So it's best to just remember the sound. If I say like, for example, 喜欢, I don't remember it as XIHUAN with tones. I remember it as just the sound 喜欢, and that works.
Yes. So you recommend just to memorize the sound when it comes to learning Chinese words.
Correct.
Yeah. Okay. So what kind of methods did you use to skyrocket your language learning result?
So as I said, I took a lot of stuff from everywhere.
Yeah.
And I didn't really back then didn't have really a method of studying. I was just basically taking whatever is available. And with Chinese, if it's especially now with the age of the internet, it's much more convenient than it used to be back then. We used to really like scour the internet for any kind of material available. Now there's loads of stuff on YouTube and stuff like that. But the main things are, and I subscribe a bit to the Stephen Kaufman way of thinking, where a lot of listening, a lot of exposure to the language, to listening, to reading is very important, is more important than the speaking part itself. Although that is basically essentially what makes you enjoy the language is the thing that is the most important. So for me, it was back then I was like listening to those Chinese songs, like a lot of like SHE and stuff like that, as well as like watching like historical dramas like Tianlong Babu and stuff like that. And those are, a lot of them are like with loads of episodes, like it's long series. So you get a lot of exposure through that. That helped me a lot. And just listening to, even passively listening to Chinese content like on Chinese pod on the way home and back and like to work and stuff like that, that helps a lot. You basically you kind of immerse yourself in the language artificially through the stuff that you have all around you.
Yeah, yes. That's how I learned English, by the way. It's just the same method that you use.
Yeah.
Yeah. So would you recommend for a beginner, if they want to master a language faster, would you recommend they spend more time? It's quite intensive in the beginning, or would you suggest?
Yes, definitely. I mean, so I would say, especially because so you get the motivation to language, you want to learn language, use that time immediately. So I wouldn't say burn yourself out. Don't, if you are not enjoying something, don't do it. Do it only if you are enjoying it. It makes you want to study longer. If it makes, so for example, I personally enjoy flashcards, and I don't like, try to specifically memorize them. I just like go through them at randomly and see, and basically try to remember what I can. What I don't remember, it's fine. So it's all right. But that makes me continue further. So I would say to anyone who is interested in learning any language, not just Chinese, but any language, start with as much content as you can, but keep that content interesting to you specifically. So stuff that you find funny or interesting or engaging and stuff like that, that's more important than just going through grammar drills, stuff like that, unless the grammar drills is specifically something that you find interesting and motivating, of course.
Yeah, that's right. And many people, they believe in order to really master a language, to speak very fluent in a new language, they need to go to a foreign country. So what would you suggest? Is that necessary, or they can create an environment in their home?
I would say necessary it is not, but it is very helpful. So this is kind of like, if I give examples of, for example, my Chinese and my Korean. So Chinese, I started with the artificial immersion, as I mentioned. So basically taking lots of stuff, listening to a lot of stuff, exposing myself to the language all the time. And then later when I was in university, because in Israel there aren't that many Asians. So when I saw an Asian, I asked him like where from, and like for most likely he will be originally from Asia. So a lot of them were Chinese, and I was like, oh, I'm learning Chinese. And back then it was they were really interested in it. They started inviting me over for dinner, stuff like that. So that helped me practice the language a lot. And when I first arrived to China, except for that one thing, that one story with the Xiaolong Bao, generally speaking was not as much of a problem, because at that point I already had like 4 years where I was exposing myself to the language as much as possible. On the other hand, when I was studying Korean, so my Korean was always very stunted until I arrived to Korea. Back then, before I arrived to Korea, I had some Korean friends that I met in Israel. We used to hang out together and stuff like that. And we talked with a mix of Korean and Hebrew, which they were learning. And then later, when I went to Korea to visit, I spent there 2 weeks. Within those 2 weeks, my Korean soared a lot because I heard it everywhere. I used it a lot. I started like making jokes in Korean with my friends and with other people on the street, and that really helped. So going to that country gives you a huge boost, but it is always recommended that while you're not in the country, you should start already earlier. Do not wait until you reach the country.
Yeah. It's better to, for me, I think it's better to learn some, at least the basic language in that country before you go to that country. And then you go to that country, you will, encounter less difficulties there. Especially in China, not everyone speaks English.
Yeah. China is, I think, depends on the location. Obviously, in places like Shanghai and Beijing, it's a little bit easier, but it's still kind of a challenge because a lot of people don't speak English, and they do not have to. No one owes you that speak to in English with you, even if they like for English they can speak it, they don't want it. That's fine. It's your obligation if you're going to the country to at least try to learn language. Although of course it's like learning language is not like an easy task. Anyone would I have a hard time with unless the language is specifically very close to your own. But that's fine because people appreciate the effort.
That's right. Right. And there's a saying, when you roam, do as the Romans do. Yeah, you cannot change the locals people there, right?
You're not supposed to, and that's fine. I think personally. So the fact that we have so many languages, especially because so it's not just the 100 and something languages that exist based on country per country or whatever, but it's the 8,000 different languages that we have, including dialects and versions of, for example, Spanish in Mexico, Spanish in Spain. Differences between that are in themselves, they make life more colorful. They are just interesting in as they are. So for example, for me, learning Shanghainese or learning Hokkien, Taiwanese Hokkien is not like, it does not give any kind of how to call it, like useful benefit to me in my day-to-day life, but it's just interesting and it's a way to open up to people, especially people who speak that language. They're like, oh, you're learning my language, kind of stuff like that. And they find it more interesting, and that's a way to open their hearts, so to say.
Yeah, yes, that's right. So how's your Chinese progress? I'm a Shanghainese. I'm a Shanghainese. How's
My
your
Sha- my Chinese progress.
Yeah.
我是来上海辰光，我上海还可以讲，现在已经有问题了，现在已经就是 like now it's already
The
kind of
progress
stunted. Yeah, exactly. It's been a while since I thought, but I still listen to it. I still try with like my anti-flashcards or whatnot. Especially Douyin is specifically great for dialects because there's so much content there, especially for Chinese. And it's also engaging stuff. It's also really fun stuff that I listen to just like out of personal interest.
Yeah. Sounds good. It's really impressive, already really impressive. So would you recommend, let's say if a person who speak no Chinese and he or she wants to learn a dialect, do you think it's possible they need to learn the Mandarin first, then learn a dialect in China?
Generally helps just for the fact that there's more resources for learning Shanghainese in Chinese than there are like in Mandarin than there are in English. But it's not a requirement. So the fact is that a lot of, for example, our students who are Huayi, who are like from Chinese heritage, many of them they speak at home a dialect, so Shanghainese or like for Fujianese or whatever. So they actually speak that better than they do Mandarin. So they come to us to learn better Mandarin. And people can also do, if, for example, let's say you are a foreigner who is married or who is dating a Shanghainese person or a Taiwanese person or whatever, you want to learn their dialect and you do not speak Chinese as much. That's totally fine because the language does not depend on each other. You can learn one without the other, but they do help each other. So again, an example with that is when I was studying Chinese, my Japanese helped me a lot with that, and vice versa. So my Japanese and Chinese kind of went together because I could use one and the other to compare stuff.
Yes. So you think they don't need to learn the Mandarin first, then learn Shanghainese. They don't need, because the grammar structure is same, right? It's the same. So they don't need to learn first. They can just pick the Shanghainese right away.
They'll just be more hard pressed to find resources. That's the main challenge, because then you would really need like specifically a teacher, because you cannot get as many, like for example, textbooks or explanations of grammar, stuff like that in Chinese for English speakers as you would if you were in Chinese. But in Chinese, but when you're learning in Chinese, then they don't explain the grammar because the grammar is pretty much the same as Mandarin, so they don't need to explain for native speakers of Mandarin.
Yes. So it's very hard to find a Shanghainese teacher, right? To learn Shanghainese.
It's possible. There's just less people who are, so there's people who have a lot of experience of teaching Mandarin Chinese. There's less people who have specific experience with teaching Shanghainese. So you would need to kind of be more flexible about that person, unless you find like some university teacher or whatnot. But otherwise, people who are Shanghainese speakers who are also Chinese teachers, they can also equally teach Shanghainese.
Yeah, sounds good. So some people they believe Chinese is the hardest language in the world. So what do you think?
I would say in some terms, yes, in some aspects, no. So stuff like, for example, characters, tones are generally, so Chinese tone language, Thai, Vietnamese are also tonal language. So if you learn other tonal languages, these will not sound as foreign to you. Characters are a bit of a challenge because you need to learn them for a long time. And you're not expected obviously to know all like useful 3,000 characters like in 1 year or whatever, but it's a kind of a continuing process that you do for years to come. In terms of speaking, Chinese is a little bit easier than, for example, Japanese or Korean or Mongolian, who work as an SOV language, so subject, object, verb, instead of the usual English speaking subject, verb, object, right?
Yes.
And what I think the hardest language would be are the ones that it's hard to find resources online for. So, for example,
Mm.
Mongolian, Chinese, Hokkien, all those kind of languages are super hard specifically because it's much harder to find, first of all, places where to study them, and also the people who speakers of those languages. Hebrew would also be, because of it, kind of considered a more harder language, because aside from the population in Israel and the US, there aren't as many Hebrew speakers around the world.
Yes. Sounds good. Those languages, the resources that are hard to find are always the hardest to learn because there's no
Correct,
so much materials online.
correct, correct.
Yes. So what inspired you to get started with your business, your language coaching business?
So LTL Language School originally started. I was the one who found that school. I didn't open it. It was another guy, Andreas, who later hired me, and I just continued there since 2012. So been there for like 10 years plus now. And originally we only started back then based in Beijing and in Chengdu, where we had an immersion program. The whole idea of LTL is called LTL for live the language, because if you want to learn language, you need to live the language.
Yes.
That's the motto behind it. So stuff like homestays, going to Chengdu, which there are no other foreign like English speakers there. Those are perfect places specifically for that. But in essence, we are a language company. We are language nerds, so to say. So we just, like a lot of us, a lot of people in the company, we are all people who just enjoy studying languages because that's just interesting as is. So before COVID, we only had like Chinese as an option. Now we also teach Japanese in Tokyo, Korean in Seoul, and Vietnamese in Saigon. And this is personally for me also super exciting because I like languages in general. So I enjoy the fact that we are expanding to more languages and we can offer more languages, not just Chinese and its various dialects.
Yeah, nice. So what's your suggestion, right, for those who want to learn Chinese?
So start, like, let's say you are not in China, right? So if you're in your own country, start with finding as much materials as you can, and then find among those materials that you find the most interesting, the ones that will keep your motivation going. Because learning the language is not a process of like half a year or a year. You need to think about it long term. So you'll be studying 5 years, 6 years, 7 years. And even when your language is already at a very elevated level, you will still be learning new vocabulary, or you still would want to learn new vocabulary just because it's interesting, right? So find the stuff that you enjoy the most. Then after studying well, then, for example, book a program to go to, for example, to China or to Singapore or to Korea or whatever language you are learning. But in this case, Chinese. Go to those countries, spend a bit of time there as much as possible, because the more time you spend in the country. So even if you just stay just a week or 2 weeks, you will still see your language progress get a boost, specifically just because staying, hearing people around, and also especially if you're kind of a more of an active person, try talking with people, even if it's kind of stuff the Chinese. If you only know a few words or a few sentences and then it devolves into English, that's completely fine, because you want to have that motivation. A lot of motivation happens just by getting to know people and wanting to speak more to them. A lot of my progress in Chinese happened because I wanted to speak with the people that I met in university back in Israel, like the Chinese people there, and also like friends that I had in Beijing who were speaking among themselves in super fast, like Beijing accented Chinese, and I really wanted to get to know what they're saying. So I started like searching for more stuff And so that's a kind of like motivator in itself. And generally being in the country, you get to know the country more, you get to know obviously the culture, and you get to boost your language skills much more and get to know friends for life. So that's a huge kind of reward in and of itself. So do that, then spend a bit of time in the country. Then when you go back home, continue with studying based on the stuff that you enjoy, movies, songs, podcasts, flashcards, whatnot, so stuff that you enjoy. And then from time to time, come back to China, study more, maybe choose different locations. So we offer cities in Beijing, Shanghai, Xi'an, Chengdu, and a bunch of other places. And, just explore and get to know the place. And the more you do that, the faster your language will be progressing in the language.
Yeah, yes, that's true. So you have the input first, then you have the output by talking to the natives there, and you will get the momentum. You will keep the momentum going, and you will want to learn more of that language as well, right?
Correct.
Yes. So, okay. Thank you, Alex, for your time. And that's all for this episode of the Caddy Show. So if you like my show, make sure you subscribe my channel and hit the notification. Until next time, stay tuned. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Have a nice day.
Yeah. 1 second, Alex. Let me